In 1979, a man called police to report finding a teenage girl's body in the snow. For 45 years, he was hailed as a good Samaritan who helped solve a tragic case. But new DNA evidence just revealed the most shocking twist in true crime history. He was actually the killer. This is the story of Esther Gonzalez and how modern science finally exposed one of the most chilling deceptions ever recorded in criminal history. What I'm about to tell you will make you question everything you think you know about criminal investigations. It's a story that spans nearly 5 decades, involves cutting-edge DNA technology, and reveals how a killer hid in plain sight for almost half a century. If you're fascinated by solved cold cases and the incredible power of forensic science, you're going to want to stick around for this one. And make sure to hit that subscribe button, because we dive deep into cases like this every week. Let me paint you a picture of February 9th, 1979. It's a cold winter evening in Beaumont, California, about 85 miles east of Los Angeles. 17-year-old Esther Gonzalez kisses her parents goodbye and heads out into the chilly night. She's planning to walk to her sister's house in nearby Banning, just 8 miles away. It's a route she's taken countless times before. Esther is young, full of life, and has her whole future ahead of her. But as she steps out into that February night, she has no idea she's walking straight into the hands of a predator. Hours pass, then more hours. Esther's sister starts to worry. Where is she? Esther should have arrived by now. The family calls around, checks with friends, retraces her usual route. Nothing. Panic sets in as they realize their worst fears might be coming true. They immediately contact the authorities, launching what would become one of California's most enduring cold cases. The next morning, February 10th, the phone rings at the Riverside County Sheriff's Department. On the other end is a man who claims he's made a horrific discovery. He says he's found a young woman's body in a snowbank off Highway 243. The caller is calm, seemingly helpful, and identifies himself as Lewis Randy Williamson, a Marine Corps veteran who says he was just passing through the area when he made this terrible find. When investigators arrive at the scene, the reality is even worse than they imagined. Esther's lifeless body lies discarded in the snow like she meant nothing. The evidence shows she was the victim of a brutal assault before being killed and dumped. It's every parent's worst nightmare, and for the Gonzalez family, their world has just been shattered into a million pieces. Now here's where this story takes its first disturbing turn, and trust me, it's just the beginning. Investigators start questioning Lewis Williamson about his discovery. Right away, they notice something odd about his behavior. He seems argumentative, agitated, almost defensive. For experienced detectives, these are red flags. Why would someone who just stumbled upon a crime scene act this way? Shouldn't he be shocked? Maybe traumatized by what he found? But here's the thing about 1979. Investigative techniques were very different back then. 5 days after the discovery, they bring Williamson in for a formal interview. They ask him questions, go over his story, and then they do something that would be considered highly unreliable today. They give him a polygraph test, and Lewis Williamson passes. Based on this single polygraph result, authorities make a decision that would haunt this case for the next 45 years. They clear him completely. They mark him off their suspect list and send him on his way. What they didn't know was that they had just let a killer walk free. For the Gonzalez family, what followed were decades of unbearable anguish. Imagine not knowing who killed your daughter, your sister, your loved one. Imagine going to bed every night wondering if her killer was still out there, maybe hurting other people. Esther's sister Elizabeth became a warrior for justice, spending decades pushing authorities to keep the case active, reaching out to media, never letting her sister's memory fade into obscurity. She organized vigils, created awareness campaigns, and never ever gave up hope that someday, somehow, someone would find the answers her family desperately needed. For 45 years, Elizabeth carried this burden, this desperate need for justice, never knowing that the man responsible had been hiding in plain sight from day one. Meanwhile, Lewis Randy Williamson was living what appeared to be a completely normal life. After his military service, he settled down, eventually relocating to Florida. He had a job, probably neighbors who thought he was a decent guy, maybe even friends who would have described him as helpful. After all, hadn't he done his civic duty by reporting that terrible crime scene back in California? For 35 years, he lived freely while a family suffered. In 2014, Williamson died of natural causes, and everyone thought whatever secrets he might have had died with him. But here's the thing about science. It doesn't forget. And it definitely doesn't lie. In recent years, the Riverside County Regional Cold Case Homicide Team began applying revolutionary new techniques to their most challenging unsolved cases. They started using something called investigative genetic genealogy, a game-changing technology that combines traditional DNA analysis with genealogical research. Basically, they can now identify suspects through their family trees, even when the perpetrator's DNA isn't in any criminal database. Think about how incredible this is. They can take DNA from a crime scene that's decades old, run it through genealogical databases, and trace it back through family connections to identify a suspect. It's like having a time machine that can reach back through the years and point directly at a killer. The Esther Gonzalez case was among their top priorities, and for good reason. They had well-preserved DNA evidence from 1979, genetic material that had been waiting patiently for technology to catch up. When they ran this DNA through genealogical databases, they started building family trees, following genetic breadcrumbs that would lead them to a shocking revelation. The DNA led them to relatives of Lewis Randy Williamson. Yes, the same Lewis Randy Williamson who had reported finding Esther's body 45 years earlier. Jason Corey, an investigator with the district attorney's office, described the moment of realization. He said when the genealogist made the connection, the investigator called him right away and said, "Hey, this could be a person of interest." Can you imagine that phone call? Can you imagine the chills that must have run down their spines when they realized what this meant? The good Samaritan who found the body, the helpful citizen who called police, the man they had cleared as a suspect 45 years ago. He might actually be their killer, but they needed to be absolutely certain. To confirm their suspicions, investigators needed a direct DNA sample from Williamson himself. Here's where a stroke of luck, if you can call it that, came into play. When Williamson died in 2014, blood had been preserved from his autopsy. This gave them exactly what they needed for a definitive comparison. When they ran the comparison between Williamson's blood and the DNA evidence from the 1979 crime scene, the results were absolutely conclusive. It was a perfect match. Not similar, not close. Perfect. Lewis Randy Williamson's DNA was found on Esther Gonzalez's body. The man who had spent 35 years being seen as someone who helped solve a case was actually the monster who committed the crime. Think about the level of deception, the cold calculation, the sheer audacity of what he did. He didn't just kill Esther Gonzalez, he then played the role of concerned citizen, calling police, probably expressing sympathy for the family, maybe even following the case in the news over the years. In November 2024, investigators finally had the evidence they needed to close this case. When they told the Gonzalez family what they had discovered, you can imagine the complex emotions that flooded through them. Elizabeth Gonzalez, who had spent 45 years fighting for justice, said something that perfectly captures the bittersweet nature of this moment. "We are very happy that we finally have closure. We are happy about it, but since the guy has died, a little sad that he won't spend any time for her murder." Justice had finally arrived, but it came 10 years too late to see Williamson face the consequences of his actions. The family's 45-year nightmare was over, but the traditional satisfaction of seeing a killer behind bars would never come. This case represents something we see more often than you might think in criminal investigations. It's a disturbing psychological phenomenon where perpetrators actually insert themselves into their own cases. Sometimes they volunteer to help with searches, sometimes they attend vigils or memorial services, and sometimes, like Williamson, they're the ones who report finding the body. Criminal psychologists believe killers do this for various reasons. Some want to monitor the investigation's progress, staying close to see if police are getting warm. Others get a twisted satisfaction from being seen as helpful while knowing they're the ones responsible. And some simply can't resist the urge to be part of the drama they created. What makes this case particularly chilling is how successful Williamson was at maintaining his deception. He passed a polygraph test. He convinced investigators of his innocence. He lived 35 years as a free man while a family suffered. If not for advances in DNA technology, he would have taken his secret to the grave and gotten away with murder forever. But this case also represents something incredibly hopeful. The power of persistence and advancing science to bring justice even when it seems impossible. Investigative genetic genealogy has revolutionized cold case investigations across the country. This same technology helped catch the Golden State Killer, solved multiple cases in the Zodiac Killer investigation, and has brought closure to hundreds of families who thought they'd never get answers. According to Project Cold Case, Nearly 346,000 homicides remain unsolved in the United States from 1965 to 2023. That's 346,000 families still waiting for answers, still hoping that someday they'll know what happened to their loved ones. Cases like Esther's prove that no matter how much time passes, no matter how cold a case gets, justice is still possible. The technology keeps getting better, the databases keep growing, and more families are getting the closure they desperately need. DNA doesn't deteriorate the way other evidence might. It doesn't forget, it doesn't lie, and it's patient. It will wait decades for the right technology to come along and tell its story. Esther's case also teaches us some crucial lessons about criminal investigations. First, the absolute importance of evidence preservation. The fact that DNA from 1979 remained viable after 45 years is what made solving this case possible. Every piece of evidence preserved is a potential key to future justice. Second, it shows us how investigative techniques evolve. What seemed impossible to solve in 1979 became solvable in 2024. The polygraph test that cleared Williamson back then is now known to be highly unreliable. Modern investigations rely on hard science, not subjective interpretations of stress responses. Third, it reminds us that initial investigations, no matter how thorough they seem at the time, might not get everything right. Cold case units exist precisely because new eyes, new technology, and new approaches can reveal truths that were hidden the first time around. But beyond all the science and investigative techniques, this is really a story about a family's incredible strength and persistence. Elizabeth Gonzalez could have given up at any point during those 45 years. She could have accepted that some questions would never be answered. Instead, she kept fighting, kept pushing, kept her sister's memory alive until technology finally caught up with justice. Esther Gonzalez was just 17 years old when her life was stolen from her on that cold February night in 1979. She never got to graduate high school, never went to college, never got married, never had children of her own. All of those possibilities died with her in that snowbank off Highway 243. But her legacy lives on in ways that Lewis Randy Williamson never could have imagined when he thought he'd committed the perfect crime. Her case has become a symbol of how persistence and advancing science can triumph over deception. It provides hope to other families still searching for answers, and it serves as a reminder that the truth, no matter how long it takes, will eventually come to light. The investigative techniques that solved Esther's case are now being applied to thousands of other cold cases across the country. Every time genetic genealogy solves another case, every time a family gets closure they never thought possible, Esther's story is part of that victory. What do you think about this shocking revelation? How do you think investigators should handle cases where someone reports finding a body? And what other cold cases do you think might be solved using these new DNA techniques? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this case fascinated you as much as it did me, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into solved cold cases. We're living in an incredible time for criminal justice, where science is finally giving voices to victims who have been silent for decades. Esther Gonzalez waited 45 years for justice, but her story reminds us that sometimes, even when all hope seems lost, the truth will find a way to surface. Her killer thought he was clever, thought he'd fooled everyone, thought he'd gotten away with murder. But DNA is patient, science is relentless, and families like the Gonzalez's never stop fighting for the truth. Justice may have been delayed, but it was not denied. And for families still waiting for answers in their own cold cases, Esther's story proves that it's never too late for the truth to come out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.